to get the musical scores. How many authors have felt that? Pastors, preachers get this message, man, I feel like my hands are on fire, just writing down as fast as I can. We're not claiming divine inspiration like the Bible. Anyway, another good sign that even the critics that should be rooting for this and saying, amen, get the message out, brother, they're now attacking. Another good sign. 866-34-TRUTH. Let us go to Brett in Concord, North Carolina. Thanks for calling.
Hey, Dr. Brown. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, sir.
Well, I thought about you recently because I was watching a documentary on PBS, and it was talking about the Stonewall riots that happened in 9.
Yeah, 50 years ago. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyways, they had an interview from someone right during that time frame, and they talked about how they just basically wanted to be left alone. And they said, we don't want to have, maybe there are a few fringe people who want gay marriage, but, that's really not where we're going. And he listed a couple of other things to say, we're really no threat. And it made me think of your book, Go and Sin No More, where, and I'm not going to get this totally right, but to paraphrase what you said, that sin will take you further than you ever thought you would go, and it'll keep you longer than you ever intended to stay.
And cost you more than you intended to pay. Yeah, that's not my line. That's someone else. But yeah, go ahead.
Okay. All right. So yeah, it just was striking to me that interview was with that man, and he said, no, we just want to be left alone.
Yep.
But now here we are 50 years later, and the advocacy for, in high schools for, the boys and girls to have to be in the same locker rooms together, and just a whole host of other things.
Exactly.
And I just wanted to let you know that I just appreciate your ministry and just the way that you speak the truth about things, and just that you can see and warn about the trends that are going on. So anyways, I just appreciate you and your insight and the way that you minister to the body by just being intimate with the Lord.
Thank you so much. And Brett, let me just say this in response. In my book, A Queer Thing Happened to America, which came out in 2011, that was the result of 6 years of research, study, interacting with gay and lesbian community. The last chapter was GLBT and beyond. Now we always say LG. In those days, G was often first, but GLBT and beyond. In other words, where's this going? You read that chapter now, 8 years later, you think everything you talked about there, that's just normal now. And there's no question, sir, that there were many among the early rioters and those sympathetic with Stonewall that just wanted to be left alone. I have no question. And to this day, there are many that identify as homosexual, just want to be left alone. And their thing was, look, if you can have your relationships, we want to have ours. If we want to be able to hold hands in public, like you hold hands in public, and just nobody bother us. And not get fired from a job because we're gay or something. Just let us live. No question that was the heart of many. At the same time, it was the heart of many others to see a societal revolution. And you can read their writings, you can read their demands from early on, even a major homosexual platform going back to 1972, and lowering the age of consent and things like that. Some just wanted to declare war on marriage, sort of as a patriarchal relic of the past, and others actually said, no, we want to transform all these things. Plus, either way, once you go in the wrong direction with a society, it will go farther than you planned to go, and the consequences will be things you never signed up for. So many Americans, they just thought, well, why can't if two men love each other, two women, and that's how they've always been, why can't they come together? And I understand the sympathy saying, look, they're nice people. Why? It's my son and his boyfriend, and why can't they? I understand people saying that. These same people didn't sign up for drag queens reading to toddlers in libraries. They didn't sign up for a 15-year-old boy showering next to their daughter in the locker room and beating her out of a scholarship on a track and field team. They didn't sign up for that. And they didn't sign up for the all-out war on religious freedoms. So, Brett, you're absolutely right, but thank you for the kind words. 888-838-34-TRUTH. Let's go over to Amy in Florida. Welcome to the Line of Fire.
Hey, Dr. Brown. How you doing?
Very well, thank you.
Awesome. I'm actually from Pensacola, so we have that in common. I'm a born-again believer as a result of the revival there. So
Praise God. So glad to hear that.
yes, amen. So I guess my husband and I have been talking a lot. We're followers of your ministry, so thank you so much for it. We thought it would be interesting. Have you ever considered doing a debate with maybe somebody like Ben Shapiro?
Oh, yeah, I do it in a heartbeat. Yeah, in a heartbeat I would. And he knows that. A lot of people suggest it and send messages to him to do it. I emailed him, I think last year, and said, hey, from my understanding, you probably don't want to do this, but I constantly get asked by people, would I do a debate with Ben Shapiro about Jesus or about Jewish beliefs about Jesus or things like that? And I said, what I'd love to do it, but I assume you wouldn't. And he wrote back immediately, thanks, Dr. Brown, but I don't really enjoy religious debates. And that was it. Now, maybe he's had a change of heart on that. Maybe it's just a little too close as a Messianic Jew that he won't want to do it. But I do it in a heartbeat. I would, if the Lord willed it, that I was debating issues on CNN every night, with liberals, I'd do it in a heartbeat. If the Lord willed it, that I was engaging with secular scholars or thinkers from different perspectives, yeah, I do it in a heartbeat. Often when I'm asked to speak on a college campus, Amy, I tell them, get a debate instead, but they can't find someone to debate me. So if the Lord opened the door, I do it in a heartbeat.
Joe Rogan would be another good one.
Yeah, well, listen, here's the thing to do. My ambition is to please the Lord. My ambition is to see Jesus glorified. And we were just praying about this as a staff and team before, that if the whole world knows the name of Jesus and forgets our name, then we've succeeded. That's wonderful. But I would joyfully go on any of these settings. Now, I wouldn't go on a Howard Stern just because it's the whole thing is polluted, and what they're going to talk about is stuff we don't want to talk about. You just put yourself in a no-win position. But to be on a show where the guy used a lot of profanity, like Joe Rogan or some other secular venue, if they would have me on, we speak honestly, candidly, yeah, in a heartbeat, gladly, with joy. I believe God desires to open those doors for us, but that's his doing. We'll pursue him and seek to walk through the doors set before us with excellence by his grace. All right. Thanks for the call, Amy. God willing, I'll be back in Pensacola early September. All right. We'll be right back with Rita Dunaway. I don't know if it's... So why does a good God allow evil in the world? I don't just mean suffering, but evil. Things that are so ugly, things that are so dark, things that are so despicable, things that are so contrary to goodness. Why does God allow them in his world? And the answer is simple. And that answer is choice. That answer is freedom. He has given us a choice. He has put us in an environment where we can choose good, we can refuse evil. God could have created Adam and Eve and given us no choice. He put them in a beautiful, perfect world and said, you can obey and be blessed, or you can disobey and be cursed. He gave a choice because love cannot be coerced. And if I said to each of you, I can do an operation on your brain, you'll no longer be able to make choices, but you'll be trouble-free the rest of your life. Would you take that, or would you say, no, I'd rather be able to make choices? Here's what God said to the people of Israel. Moses gave this challenge in Deuteronomy 30, verse 19. I call heaven and earth to witness against you today, that I've set before you life and death, blessing and curse. Therefore choose life, that you and your offspring may live. He gives us a choice and says, you determine whether it will be blessing or curse, whether it will be life, whether it will be death. And even in this world where there is evil, there is pain, there is hardship, we can learn through it. We can grow through it. Everything that this world means to drag us down and destroy us can help us draw closer to God. The things that are meant for evil can be turned for good. Often it's through suffering and pain that we grow closer to the Lord. Often it's by seeing evil that we determine all the more to do good and be vessels of good. So even the evil can be used for good purposes. And then, having made our choice, having cast our lot, having said, Lord, we want you and we don't want the evil, the day will come when Jesus will return, when we will be resurrected, when we will be with him forever, and when we will be in a perfect world where there is no sin, there is no evil, there is no pain, there is no death, and God will wipe away every tear from our eyes. That day will come. But right now, we're in a world with darkness and light, with blessing and curse, with good and evil. We make choices, and even when evil comes to our door, it can be turned around as an opportunity for greater good. Our God is a Redeemer. Hey friends, many more resources waiting for you on our website, askdrbrown.org. I look forward to being with you there. God of light, hear our cry, send the fire.
It's The Line of Fire with your host, Dr. Michael Brown, your voice of moral, cultural, and spiritual revolution. Here again is Dr. Michael Brown.
You know, we often focus on very important issues that are kind of micro issues, and sometimes we're unable to look at the bigger picture or some other important national solutions, some of which very much tie in with the law or larger conservative principles. My guest today, Rita Dunaway, has written a book, Restoring America's Soul, Advancing Timeless Conservative Principles in a Wayward Culture. Rita's an attorney. She's focused on constitutional law. She's worked with Alliance Defending Freedom, Rutherford Institute, National Legislative Strategist now for the Convention of States Project. So some large, important issues we want to talk about. This is Michael Brown. I won't be taking calls during this part of the broadcast, but this is something that is relevant, useful for all of us. So, Rita, so good to have you on the Line of Fire for the first time.
I am excited to be here. Thanks for having me on your program.
Well, absolutely my joy. Let me ask you first how you got into the career focus that is now such an important part of your life.
Well, I guess it started for me back in college, and I just remember in my very first constitutional law class as an undergraduate even, going through the course thinking, what is it that I'm missing here? Because seems to be this disconnect between what the Constitution says and what our government today is actually doing. And so that really inspired me to dig deeper and try to figure out where that disconnect was coming from and what could be done about it. And in addition to that, I've always been really concerned about religious freedom and the erosion of religious freedom in our country. So those two things really kind of drove me to law school and pointed me in the direction of first the Rutherford Institute, then Alliance Defending Freedom, where I do volunteer work, and now, of course, the Convention of States Project.
So Rita, let me ask you a question that should be redundant, but in our day is a genuine question. What's the big deal with the Constitution? I mean, that's a few hundred years ago,
Yeah.
and sure, I mean, we started like an important thing, but why are we living by this ancient document? I mean, that's old school now. It's a new day. Why is the Constitution so important?
Yeah, first I have to remark on the fact that you're so right. That is a genuine question today, whereas even probably 50 or 60 years ago, that would have been unthinkable because as you and I know, the Constitution is the blueprint. It's the operating manual for our government. It's what we, the people, agreed to give power to our federal government. because we are people with natural rights, God-given rights, rights that we were given by our Creator that didn't come from the government. And we, as people with natural rights, agreed to give up this small portion of our freedom in order to have a government to protect our rights and ensure our freedom to pursue happiness. And so the answer to your question is, we talk all the time in our society, even still today, about the rule of law. So if we care at all about living in a society where we have the rule of law rather than rule by the whims of judges, legislators, or even presidents, then we need to care deeply about whether our government is respecting the Constitution, because that's the document that gives it power.
Got it. Got it. All right. So, Rita, you start off your book, Restoring America's Soul, talking about your own conservative awakening. I'm a conservative because of my biblical faith. I do social commentary that comes out of me being in ministry. So it's not like I was raised with a conservative philosophical mindset, or I could articulate, what are the best conservative principles for government and things like that. But in your mind, there's a clear connection between the right direction of our government and conservatism. So what do you mean when you talk about your own conservative awakening? Does that mean that you bought a gun, joined the NRA? I mean, what does it mean? It's so stereotyped today. What actually happened to you?
Yeah. Well, I was actually raised in a conservative family and grew up hearing my parents talk about conservative values, and I grew up in the faith as a Christian, and so the values of conservative politically have always been my values. But the awakening for me came just a few years back, really. Even though I've been a conservative all along, I started to reflect on, well, why is it that a person who holds the political views that I do, why are we called conservatives? And I had the experience of hearing a conservative leader tell me that conservatives are people who don't like change. And I thought, I don't really like that description. I would not put myself in that basket. I don't think that's a good way to describe it. So that started me really thinking, why am I called a conservative, and what does that mean? And as I discuss in the book, I think the best explanation or definition I've found is that a conservative, in a true sense of the word, is a conserver of the things that we hope to keep in our society, a conserver of things that are good in our culture and in our government. And I would say a conservative is someone who believes that our founding fathers in America got it right. Not that they were perfect, not that they were unflawed by any means, because we know that they had their flaws and they made mistakes, but they were on to something with the blueprint that they put together for our government. They got it right.
Got it. So conserving the things that we want to keep. So the conservative movement, if you speak broadly in America, it's taken some hits in recent years. What have we done wrong? What's happened that has tarnished our character or our effectiveness in the culture?
Well, and that's really one of the things that inspired me to write the book, is that I feel like we have a blind spot in some ways when it comes to recognizing that we haven't done everything right. And I think we have gone off course a little bit. And I think the biggest problem, our biggest failing right now as a movement, is that we have become understandably frustrated with what's happening in politics and in our government, with how far our government has strayed from its legitimate constitutional power. We're all frustrated by that, and that's understandable. But the problem is, I think that our frustration has led us largely in one of two directions. Either we start to grumble, complain, and adopt a really snarky tone when we talk about public policy, or on the other hand, I think some conservatives have just kind of gone underground and we're not talking anymore at all because we've kind of given up on doing any sort of real reform in our government and our culture. And that's a real shame. We need to become more active, not less, when we see our country going downhill. And we need to raise our standards, not lower them. And I would have to add in this regard, too, that I think President Trump has presented a big challenge for the conservative movement. I myself have such mixed feelings about him. He has done some wonderful things for this country, and I am very happy with a lot of his performance, his policies, the work that he's done to protect life in America and around the country, to protect religious freedom. We should all be very grateful. On the other hand, a lot of the things that he says and does don't reflect my values as a Christian and as a conservative. There's a lack of humility. Sometimes there's a lack of graciousness and kindness. And I think it gives conservatives a bad name, and we should be concerned about that.
All right, so that brings up a big topic. Friends, I'm speaking with Rita Dunaway, her book, Restoring America's Soul. And that's the idea that, look, politics is so mixed. The swamp is so deep. Whoever you elect is going to fail somewhere. Even if the person is ideal, you've got to go through a party, and there's so much party politics and red tape, and nothing's ever going to change. So what? Just preach the gospel, love your family and your kids, seek to be a good witness on your job, but forget that America's always going to be messed up with government. I mean, that's why a lot of people feel a certain cynicism. What would you say to that attitude that, look, government itself is just so corrupt, and there's so much red tape, and the swamp is so deep, and party politics and all this, and then flawed individuals leading? Why even bother? How would you respond to that?
Well, those are exactly the people that I want to talk to.
Please do.
And I would say, first of all, yes, preach the gospel. That's the most important thing. Nothing is more important than that, because the government is not going to save anyone's soul.
Mm-hmm.
And we know that. So we can't stop doing that. We can't stop taking care of our families and our neighbors and being community-minded. But I would remind, in particular, the Christians who are listening to this program, that we are called to love our neighbor. And as Americans, we are given the privilege, the responsibility of being involved in government, in the policies it sets and the decisions that it makes. And because we have that privilege and responsibility, we are not doing everything we can do to love our neighbor if we are willing to turn our back on that whole process just because we're frustrated or because it's hard. So I would submit that as a Christian, that can't be an option for us.
Got it. Yeah, and Rita, what I always deal with is the question, okay, so then we abdicate. Now things go downhill even more rapidly. Now we're even more upset. We've got more issues. It's affecting our kids. It's affecting our liberties. And we realize now we have to stand. We have to get involved. And at that point, we're already 5 steps too far back. All right, we're going to continue speaking with Rita Dunaway. The book, Restoring America's Soul, Advancing Timeless Conservative Principles in a Wayward Culture. By the way, if we have time, I just want to ask Rita, why does the Electoral College matter? Should we just go to a majority vote? Not sure if we'll have time, but we'll see if we get there. When I came to faith in 1971 and the immediate days after that, so I knew there were people that were called to be pastors, and there were evangelists. I knew those too. So the evangelist, that was someone that traveled from church to church, and the pastor was one state of one place. That's what I knew. And then I found out that there's some called to be teachers, that Jesus spent a lot of his ministry teaching, okay, so that was another calling. But I remember asking one day, are there prophets around today? I asked my pastor, do you think there are prophets today? By which I thought of like an Isaiah maybe in a cave somewhere today with a long beard and a scroll and right. And he said, yeah, I believe there's some prophets today. And, the question of apostles we didn't really talk about because you had the 12 apostles and that was it. But then you have Ephesians chapter 4, verse 11. Ephesians 4:11, speaking of Jesus when he ascended, that he gave the apostles, or he gave some to be apostles, prophets, evangelists, shepherds or pastors, and teachers. Now, some say this is what we call fivefold ministry: apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, teachers. Some say it's really fourfold: apostles, prophets, evangelists, and then pastor/teacher. Do these ministries all exist today? Yes, I believe they do. No, you don't have the 12 apostles or anyone functioning with that same authority today or writing scripture. But do you have people who are called to be apostles, just like, for example, Barnabas is called an apostle in Acts 14? It just means a sent one. These who are foundation layers, who are spiritual fathers, who might be church planters, who might be movement leaders. I believe, say, someone like Hudson Taylor or someone like William Booth. I believe they were apostles, even though they didn't carry that name or have that concept. I believe they are. One of my friends in India who's planted over 7,000 churches, who's planted ministries in other nations, who's built hospitals, who's been a prophetic witness for the Lord, who's almost stoned to death for his faith. We're stoned for his faith. I believe he's a modern-day apostle, even though he wouldn't use that term. And yes, there are clearly prophets today.
Dr. Michael Brown, your voice of moral, cultural, and spiritual revolution. Get into the line of fire now by calling 866-34-TRUTH. Here again is Dr. Michael Brown.
Thanks, friends, for joining us on the Line of Fire. I'm speaking with attorney Rita Dunaway. Her book, Restoring America's Soul, is divided into three parts. Part one, a conservative identity crisis, and part two, tough issues, persuasive conservatism. And tough issues she lists there are caring for the poor, protecting religious liberty, the savvy pro-lifer, and the natural marriage worth conserving. These are issues obviously near and dear to our hearts, and many of them we focused on, talked about on the air. So that's of great interest to me in the book. Then part three is two strategies for restoring America's soul, putting government back in its place and restoring a culture of virtue. And I really want to focus on these last two issues in the book here. Rita, you talk in your book about a convention of states. Many of us don't even know what that is, what you're referring to, and how that ties in with a strategy to restore America's soul. So please explain what this is and then why it could be so important.
I'd be happy to. Well, Article 5 is the part of the Constitution that outlines the ways that we can amend the Constitution, because the Founding Fathers foresaw that there would be a need for that at some point. They knew they weren't perfect. And so there are two ways of doing it. And we've only in America ever used one of the two ways, and that's to have Congress propose amendments, and then those amendments go to the states, and it takes 38 of the states to ratify an amendment proposal. The other route, the one that we've never used before, allows the states to come together in what's called a convention. It's effectively just a meeting of state delegations, and then the state delegations propose constitutional amendments to deal with particular problems on particular topics, which then again get sent back to the states. And again, it takes 38 states to ratify an amendment proposal. The reason this is so important today is because we have a huge problem in this country with federal overreach. And as I mentioned before, the government operating in Washington, D.C. today is not the government that's outlined in the Constitution. I mean, you would never guess by just reading the Constitution that our federal government would be doing all the things that it's doing today. It's eating up all of the power, invading the prerogatives of the state. And by the way, the cost of its doing that is this incredible, immoral national debt that is going to be on the backs of our children and grandchildren for generations. So the reason Article 5 is so important today is because that federal overreach that we see, the way that has come about is by perversion of constitutional language. And I'll just name a couple of examples: the General Welfare Clause, the Commerce Clause, the Necessary and Proper Clause. Because those clauses use broad language, Congress can tax and spend for the general welfare. Well, so Congress and the courts now interpret that to mean Congress can tax and spend for anything it thinks is a good idea, period. And that's not what was ever intended. So that's where Article 5 comes in, is that by using that Article 5 process, the state can come together and put this check on federal power by proposing an amendment, for example, that would restore the original meaning of the General Welfare Clause by further limiting it and saying, no, the General Welfare Clause doesn't mean you can tax and spend on anything you like. It means you can tax and spend in order to carry out your specific powers in the Constitution.
Right. So this is so foreign to so many of us, and yet we're talking about massive governmental issues. And friends, even though there are micro topics that the book touches on, if you're talking about caring for the poor, you're talking about caring for individuals, there's still larger issues that are affecting America. And without addressing some of the larger issues, it's difficult to solve some of the ongoing specific problems. Rita, you're obviously younger than me. I'm 64. You're quite a bit younger than me. You've grown up in a bit of a different world than I grew up in. Do you have hope? Do you have hope that America's soul can be restored and that there can be a blessed future for our country?
I do have hope in that, but I have to be clear that I think in order for that to happen, it will involve using both of these strategies that I outlined. Just in general, it's going to require reforming government, but it also absolutely requires reforming our culture. And the government piece, I think, is so important because today I see generations of people who look to government as an idol. They look to government as the provider of their needs, the securer of their welfare, the giver of good things. And that was never intended to be the role of government. And it exalts government to the place of effectively a god for so many people. So we've got to get rid of the idea that government is God. We've got to knock it down from that idol status. But also the culture, our culture is so degraded today. And I have to say, it never bothered me nearly as much as it does now until I became a parent. And when I look and see what my kids are exposed to, walking through a shopping mall, they're exposed to things that I wish I could protect their eyes from seeing and their ears from hearing. And it makes me sad that I have to sit them down. I have 2 teenagers in the house now, but even when they were younger, having to sit them down and talk to them about the whole idea of gay marriage, it really saddens me. And so we've got to do our work, starting in our own families, to restore the culture as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Friends, the book, Restoring America's Soul, Advancing Timeless Conservative Principles in a Wayward Culture. Hey, Rita, I just need your soundbite answer on this. I know it's off topic, but I'm sure it's something you can speak to. The Electoral College, is it important?
Yes, it's important. And I'll go back to the founders knew what they were doing, and they got so many things right. And we need to preserve their wisdom. Electoral College is important for a lot of reasons, but just one example is, it's what ensures we don't end up with a president who's just favored by a few, regional areas that are very populous. We need to make sure our president is someone that can garner support from every corner and pocket of the nation and represent the whole country. So let's not mess with that.
Got it. All right. Thank you for weighing in on that, Rita. And hey, how old are your teenagers?
13 and 15.
Yeah, and Rita, what's remarkable is when I'll have folks in our school of ministry, so they have to be college age and up, but some of them are fresh out of high school. So they're just 18, and they'll talk about how dramatically the world has changed in the last 2 or 3 years. I'm thinking that's really saying something. Quite remarkable.
It is, yeah.
Well, the Lord bless you in the home and in your advocacy and all the work that you're doing. Again, friends, Rita Dunaway, the author of the book, Restoring America's Soul. Thanks so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate the work that you do. Keep it up.
All right, we're going for it. God bless. All right, friends, let me give you a final word of encouragement. In 1983, in a season of very intense prayer and God moving in my life, the Holy Spirit spoke to me that I would be used in a revival that would touch the world. It was such an outlandish thought. Here I was finishing up my PhD work at New York University, relatively unknown in any ministry capacity, virtually unknown aside from a few local churches in the area where I'd spoken and things like that. And God spoke this to me. We had just been involved in a powerful outpouring in a local church. And I remember when I heard it, I thought, you've lost your mind, man. You're crazy. But the more I'd pray, the more I'd feel this in my heart, the more I'd be reminded that God promised this. And it led to, I referenced it earlier in the show, years of praying and fasting and crying out, agonizing, God, you promised it. Where is this? And then he graced me with being on the front lines of the Brownsville revival from 1996 to 2000. The literal attendance, cumulative more than 3 million people, several 100,000 different individuals responding to the altar calls to get right with God. And church historian Vincent Sinan said that it was the longest running local church revival in American history. An extraordinary privilege to be in the midst of it. People came from 130 nations, and missionaries now sent out from our school that was raised up through that are all around the world. And the story continues. Starting in the late 90s, God began to stir my heart, and then very intensely in the early 2000s, that there was going to be a gospel-based moral and cultural revolution in America, that there would be a pushing back against the craziness of the world and society in which we're living. Yes, things would get dark and even darker, but that light would rise in the midst of it, and that I'd have the privilege of being right in the thick of it. Friends, God's not through with America. Oh, he cares about the whole world. He cares about every individual. But he's not through with America. Oh, we may go through extreme shaking, the likes of which we've never known. But I truly believe that the holy pushback will continue, that more and more of God's people will have awakening in their own lives and will say, enough is enough. We're going to go do the will of God, and we're going to see it in front of our eyes. Friends, don't forget, go to JezebelsWarWithAmerica.com. Go there. You'll find out why when you get there. Back with you tomorrow for Thoroughly Jewish Thursday.